We've taken a trip back in time to July 1953.
Back then, Monday night was Lucy night. Just about everybody loved Lucy. A whopping 2/3 of the nation's TV sets were tuned to CBS to watch Lucy and Ricky. America's favorite couple was even on the cover of TV Guide.
That month, the Korean War was drawing to a close after 3 long years, but the Cold War was heating up. Howard Hughes' wife, film star Terry Moore, graced the cover of Life magazine.
But here in southern Nevada, the really big news was the arrival of Nevada's first television station, KLAS-TV, Channel 8.
On Wednesday, July 22nd, 1953, the headline in the Las Vegas Sun said it all. Usher in the TV era tonight. And with a flip of a switch, history was made.
We're proud to be the first television station in southern Nevada. Join us as we celebrate the first 50 years of broadcasting. We are KLAS-TV, Channel 8, Las Vegas.
Hi, I'm Gary Waddell.
And I'm Paula Francis. Thanks for joining us as we celebrate Channel 8's golden anniversary.
For the next hour, we're going to take a look back at the last 50 years of television and life here in southern Nevada.
Channel 8 signed on at 7 p.m. Wednesday, July 22nd, 1953. Back then, we aired just one newscast each day, a whopping 10-minute report each evening at 6 o'clock.
We've come a long way since then. We now broadcast more than 6 hours of news a day, more than any other television station in Nevada. It's a commitment to leadership, a tradition that began 50 years ago this week.
Now an actual television program with no faking attempted is brought to motion picture audiences.
The earliest television broadcasts took place in the 1930s. But way back then, TV was in the experimental stages. It wasn't until after World War II that the medium really took off. By 1953, there were 125 stations from coast to coast.
I'm in love. Life is a beautiful thing. As long as I hold.
Here in Las Vegas, much of the action was still downtown, but the Strip's popularity was growing. The Sahara and the Sands were the newest of the 7 resorts, boasting a total of more than 1,000 rooms. The groundbreaking next to the Desert Inn wasn't for a new hotel, but for Nevada's first TV studio.
My father always wanted to start new ventures, and I think this was a new venture where he thought, gee, I'd like to be the one who brings TV to Las Vegas.
Local contractor Rube Jolly put up $50,000 to help start Channel 8. Newspaper publisher Hank Greenspun was another big investor in the station that he would, by 1958, own. The other original stockholders were mostly local shopkeepers.
But the appliance dealers came in because they wanted to sell television sets. It was a rage all over the country.
So they were very anxious for sales in this area. So it didn't take very much convincing for them to get on the bandwagon and see that we got television here real fast.
For several weeks, as engineers tested the transmitter, KLAS broadcast only a test pattern.
And I remember sitting in my house because we got a TV before it opened, and the neighborhood came around to watch the test pattern, and they would have ads for like Mason Furniture.
The big day, TV Day in Las Vegas, finally arrived on July 22nd. The honor of pulling the switch went to Governor Charles Russell.
And he pulled the switch to have the first TV station in Las Vegas, and so it was a big deal, and most of the prominent citizens of the city were there that night.
Some big-name entertainers were also on hand, including actress Gail Storm, vaudeville star Georgie Jessel, and singer Anna Maria Alberghetti. Also appearing, along with his ukulele, was an 18-year-old Las Vegan named Bob Beville.
Of course, that was live television in those days. They didn't film or tape anything. So if you made a mistake, it went on the air, and that was it. So everyone was petrified that they were going to make a mistake. And I'm sure we made them anyway, but it was quite a thrill to be on the opening night of the first TV station in Nevada.
Beville got a certificate honoring his opening night appearance. Within days, his folks bought their first TV.
Well, every time everybody got off work, they went straight home and turned on the television set. People stopped going out. That lasted for several months, just out of curiosity on what's on television.
Now we plug it in, and we get ourselves a real picture. Wait and see. You wait and see.
The Ricardos and the Mertzes learned the hard way. Television sets in the late 50s were finicky things. But in Las Vegas, they were selling like hotcakes, in spite of the steep prices. This console TV sold for $369, a big chunk of change, considering that back then, Nevada license plates cost just $5, and a TV dinner, a new product in 1953, sold for $1.29.
Trust Swanson. That's what most folks do. They're the ones. No comparison.
So, I took Swanson.
So from now on, we'll always take Swanson.
Since in the beginning it was the only TV station, KLAS carried CBS programs as well as those of both ABC and Dumont, which folded in 1956. But when it came to network news, CBS led the way.
Your neighborhood Shell dealer who serves you with Shell Premium Gasoline with TCP presents Shell News with Hank Thornley.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Here are the latest headlines from the wires of Associated Press.
Local TV news was slightly different here on Channel 8.
Turning now to news of the West in our own region and locality, Airman Daniel Schmidt returned home to the United States from a Red Chinese prison camp to find his wife remarried to another man.
Barbara Greenspun fondly remembers those early years of television in Las Vegas, which 50 years ago was a very different kind of town.
It was a wonderful, wonderful community. It was a wonderful time. I'm very happy I lived through those years.
When Channel 8 signed on in 1953, Las Vegas was a simpler place. If you drove just west of Decatur, you were in the desert. And for the price of a drink, you could be entertained by a guy named Sinatra. For some people, watching Channel 8 was a social event. When Channel 8 was young, Las Vegas was also in its infancy. In 1953, most families in southern Nevada didn't have TV sets. Those who did often had a lot of company.
Channel 8 would come on, and it would not be continuous programming. You would start off with a test pattern, and maybe at 3 o'clock would be the first program.
Well, they didn't have the made-for-TV blockbusters we have today. Back then, the old test pattern got a lot of airtime and got an audience, too.
When we saw the test pattern on, we knew at some point in time there would be a program. Now, we didn't know if it was going to be the next 5 minutes or the next 20 minutes, so we would usually sit and patiently wait.
Back in '53, you did your clothes shopping on Fremont Street. The drive from Henderson to Las Vegas meant passing through the towns of Whitney and Pittman, and crossing the desert meant driving to Decatur.
Like night and day. It's like a new planet. We knew Decatur was the outskirts of town, and now we see what it is.
Like Channel 8, Gary Vann was born in 1953. His dad ran Garwood Vann's Music Land at the corner of Sahara and Las Vegas Boulevard. The business was located in the shopping center where the world's largest gift shop sits today. Everyone in town knew the music store.
From 1959 to 1975, grew up in the back of that record store, and you never knew who was going to show up.
Guys like Hope, Skelton, and Fox stopped in on a regular basis. But one day back in 1964, Vann and his employees saw 4 up-and-coming young musicians waving to them from the balcony of their hotel room at the Sahara.
We all walked out of the store, and we're all looking up there, and all 4 of them are waving like that. I said, these guys are going to be big someday.
Those guys were the Fab Four. It was the Beatles' first and only stop in Las Vegas.
It was a wild whoop-de-doo at the airport when they came off, and everybody was out to the airport to visit them. It was an experience. 1 chord I heard, that was it. And then the rest was screaming fans.
In the 1950s, television was in black and white. And ironically, TV news carried stories of the fledgling civil rights movement in the United States. And back then, Las Vegas was as segregated as Little Rock. One of Channel 8's early on-air hosts remembers the racism here in southern Nevada.
Gonna rock around the clock tonight.
Southern Nevadans, all 80,000 of them, might have been rocking back in the mid-50s, but to a very different beat than today.
Everything was segregated, separated and segregated. And that's the way it was.
When Bob Bailey moved here in 1955, Las Vegas was commonly known as the Mississippi of the West.
The theaters were segregated. There were patterns of where blacks had to sit. The restaurants were not available for you on the Strip.
Bailey moved here for work at the new Moulin Rouge resort. His race had prevented him from finding work in his chosen career, television.
I had tried to get a show in all of the eastern towns and it was turned down.
Dejected but determined, Bob Bailey pitched his show to KLAS. At first, he got the usual cold shoulder.
And I think the only difference was that I ran into a guy called Hank Greenspun.
Greenspun, who owned both the Sun newspaper and Channel 8, initially gave Bailey a 13-week contract.
It was advertised as the first television show in the country that was produced, directed, acted, and financed by African Americans.
He was an instant hit. The Bob Bailey Show became a staple of the Las Vegas airwaves for nearly 20 years, thanks in part to his big-name guests.
Everybody hates a smart-ass, Frank.
Frank, Dean, all of the Rat Pack when they were in town, Tony Bennett, Nat King Cole used to come and bring his whole trio over and play.
In the late 50s, Bob Bailey took his show to another local station. From the first day, it was clear that racism was alive and well in Las Vegas.
It was located in one of the hotels on Fremont Street. I could not go through the front door to get up to the television station. I had to go through the back door to get up to the television station, to go into people's homes through the television.
By the time the 1960s arrived, Bob Bailey was already involved in the local civil rights movement. On TV, he would jokingly chide his white viewers.
I know that you probably are wondering what I'm going to do next, but I'm not going to come out of the screen and get you. Sometimes you play on prejudices, and I always found that you get a lot of mirth out of laughing at yourself as opposed to getting so serious about everything.
At age 76, Bob Bailey is still trying to level the playing field. His company helps people of color start new businesses here in southern Nevada.
You can't keep a person down without keeping yourself down. You can't keep your foot on my neck without keeping your foot in the gutter.
In the 1950s, Elvis was king. England had just crowned a new queen. And KLAS-TV had its own Cinderella. You'll meet her coming up.
And long before Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown, one local judge took to the airwaves as a submarine commander, right here on Channel 8.
While Channel 8 celebrates 50 years on the air, a high-flying Southern Nevada group celebrates 50 years in the air. The U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds are 50 years old. The precision flying team was activated in 1953 and was first based at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. In 1956, the Air Force moved the Thunderbirds to Nellis Air Force Base here in Nevada. More than 300 million people have seen the Thunderbirds fly in all 50 states and 60 foreign countries.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie.
In 1953, Dean Martin's hit That's Amore topped the record charts. Rooms in first-class hotels went for about $7.50 a night. And the birth of Little Ricky on I Love Lucy brings in big ratings. In real life, Lucy and Desi welcomed their own son into the world. Today, he's a Boulder City resident.
1953 was a great year. I Love Lucy was on TV, Channel 8 went on the air, and oh yeah, I was born. I'm Desi Arnaz Jr. Happy 50th anniversary, Channel 8.
In the early days of television, the late afternoon hours after school let out were usually filled with children's programs. That certainly was the case in Las Vegas. KLAS led the way in live shows for kids. One of the earliest hosts is still working with the youth of our community, but in a very different way.
5 times you were dirty for cocaine.
Nowadays, Jack Lehman is best known as the creator of Clark County's successful drug court.
I'm running this show.
But in the mid-1950s, Jack Lehman was running a different kind of show, the Commander Lee Kiddie Show on Channel 8.
I was in a submarine commander. That's where the name Commander Lee came from. It would go from 5 to 6, and I'd have anywhere from 5 to 20 kids on every night, 5 nights a week. And I'd show cartoons and serials and interview the kids on camera.
The kids were called submariners. By the thousands, they signed up to appear on TV.
The town at that time had 50,000 people. I had 7,800 submariners that got on the show by signing up with my sponsor.
Jack Lehman was never really in the Navy. He was an Army man who started in radio in Korea. But after a few years in broadcasting, he switched to law.
Repeat it to me. How often are you going to go? What'd you say?
Jack Lehman became a judge in 1988. His years on TV and later on the bench have shown him just how dramatically young people have changed.
I think they don't have the same childhood that children that were being raised in the 50s and the 60s have.
Now, you wouldn't want to interfere with your sister going out with her beau, now would you?
Violence on television used to be limited to the occasional fistfight or gunfight. The judge worries about the current prevalence of violence, sex, and drugs on TV.
I think it desensitizes them, so that's why crime has increased. That and drugs is why crime has increased so enormously.
Channel 8's longest-running children's show began airing in 1956. It ended in 1968 when the woman who wrote, produced, and hosted the show moved out of town. Nancy Merle Bunker spent more than 4,000 hours in front of the camera at Channel 8 as Las Vegas's own Cinderella.
You do the hokey pokey and you
By today's standards, the show that Nancy Merle Bunker both produced and hosted looks simple, but also wholesome.
That's what it's all about.
Over 12 years, 30,000 youngsters joined Cinderella in her Channel 8 castle, and they learned that the hokey pokey isn't what it's all about.
We usually ask the boys and girls about good habits or safety rules. Will you share with us?
Try to prevent forest fires.
She always treated children with a great attentiveness, and I think the children who appeared on the show and those who watched it were made better people for the attitudes that she projected.
Now a great-grandmother, Nancy Merle was on hand as a new exhibit about her show was unveiled at the Clark County Heritage Museum. She's still full of fond memories of her years on KLAS-TV.
I feel it was helpful to the parents because the parents told me they encouraged their children to watch. Whatever we could do to help them become better citizens.
Of course, given it was live, the show had its unexpected moments.
Have you been learning any good habits?
No, I didn't learn some yet, but I went to school, but I forgot it.
Of course, parents often help their kids learn a good habit.
So my dad had coached my brother to say, never hit your grandmother over the head with a shovel because it might leave a bad impression. So he didn't say it.
Can you think of a good habit, Jimmy?
Oh, yeah.
What was life like for teenagers back in the 50s? Coming up, we'll reminisce with the class of '53.
And some fourth graders get a history lesson as they celebrate their school's 50th anniversary.
When you're talking Las Vegas, you're talking love. In the 1940s, the entertainment capital of the world also emerged as the wedding capital. By 1963, about 20,000 couples were married here. This year, that many people were married by Valentine's Day. By the end of 2003, about 250,000 people will say "I do" in Las Vegas. Some famous people married here over the years: Elvis and Priscilla, Richard Gere, Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland, and Paul Newman. The record for getting married most often in Las Vegas, Mickey Rooney tied the knot here 8 times. In 1963, a gunslinger and a lawyer were TV favorites. Gunsmoke and Perry Mason are 2 of the longest-running shows in American television history.
Viva Las Vegas.
And on the silver screen, filming begins for Viva Las Vegas, starring Elvis Presley and Ann Margaret.
Happy birthday, Channel 8 from the Crazy Girls.
When schools reopen next month, there will be 35 high schools here in Clark County, including 2 brand new ones. We've come a long way from 1953, when there was only 1 high school in the city of Las Vegas. We dropped by as members of the Las Vegas High School Class of '53 held their 50-year reunion. In 1953, they were just teenagers, members of the senior class at Las Vegas High School. Now they are, for the most part, retirees, attending their momentous 50th class reunion and sharing memories of a very different Las Vegas.
It was just a friendly, small town in those days, and it was fun.
Alice Waite, Alice Theriot back then, grew up in this house on South 9th Street.
Well, I only lived 2 blocks from the school. I don't ever remember carrying a house key even to my house. It was just the door was always unlocked.
As classmates revisit their high school days, their yearbook reminds them of the nuclear testing that was then underway.
3, 2, 1, 0.
In 1953, Southern Nevada was playing a key role in the Cold War. It was the nation's test site for atom bombs.
There was one day they even dismissed school and we went into the bleachers to watch a test. We actually saw the flash.
Hank Rilling especially remembers Friday, April 6th. A test called Dixie was underway as Rilling lunched at Sills Drive-In.
Our habit was we would eat lunch and get back to school so we could socialize on the front steps. And at that very time that we were socializing was coincidental with the nuclear cloud and its fallout coming over Las Vegas High School.
For years, the government denied that fallout was harmful, but in the face of growing health problems downwind from the test site, it finally admitted a link between the radioactive clouds and cancer.
I was bowled over by the class of '54 reunion about 10 years ago at how many had died. So I began at our class of '53 reunion to ask questions.
As his curiosity grew, Rilling mailed a questionnaire to his classmates.
The incidence of thyroid cancer, which in the normal population is 2 per 100,000, I ascertained from the survey in our class it was 8 per 50 individuals.
Hank Rilling is one of the many who developed thyroid cancer, but neither he nor his classmates ever got any compensation from the federal government, even though other downwinders did. Las Vegans were specially excluded because politicians worried that the publicity could hurt tourism.
Gary, when high school students were celebrating graduation in 1953, a group of elementary school students was getting ready to head into a brand new school, one of the first elementary schools in Las Vegas. Polly Gonzalez is here with that story.
Paula, the fourth grade students who call Wasden Elementary School home now were not around in 1953 when their school first opened its doors. But today those students are spearheading an effort to make sure their school's history is preserved for generations to come.
He got the grandfather.
To the average eye, it may look like just a simple game of marbles being played by a group of school children. But for these fourth grade girls and boys at Wasden Elementary School, it's a lesson learned, a trip back in time. Marbles is a game girls and boys played when their school first opened its doors.
We are 50 years old as of this year.
As part of the celebration, students have been given the task of researching what their school was like back in 1953. Back then it was called West Charleston. The school's principal was Howard Wasden.
They've learned so much, not only about the history of their school, but about the history of the neighborhood.
Armed with a few tape recorders and notebooks, students began interviewing former teachers, students, and employees.
There would be chickens behind the house. You might see a goat tied out in front of one of the houses. You see bales of hay all around.
Students came up with their own set of questions.
They had school rules and dress code. The big question is, what was your best memory? What was school lunch like?
Mostly girls wore dresses, but sometimes they got to wear stockings when it was cold.
And students learned a lot more than they anticipated.
Our school was built on federal funds, and we had a goat. They had a pen for it so the kids could pet it, but only for like a week.
But this project doesn't end with a compilation of research. Students have been awarded a grant to publish what they've learned. All of their names will be in black and white in a book about the school's history.
And that goes beyond any test that you could give a child. When I look at how I can measure what they've learned, I can measure it in real writing and real interviewing and a real publication that they'll have with them even when they're my age.
In their own way, the students are themselves becoming another page in Wasden's rich Las Vegas history. Putting Wasden's history on paper isn't an easy task. Students will continue working on the project and it will be sent to the publisher and printer next school year. Gary and Paula, back to you.
He was a playboy, filmmaker, eccentric recluse, and one of the wealthiest men in the world. And at one time, he owned Channel 8.
When we come back, we'll take a look at how Howard Hughes changed the face of Las Vegas and of KLAS-TV.
Lake Mead is the lifeblood of Las Vegas. But today, it looks like the lake needs a transfusion. The white stripe around the shore marks where the water used to be. The water level at Lake Mead is closing in on a 40-year low. The king of rock and roll helps us see Lake Mead around 1964. That's when Elvis water skied with Anne Margaret in the movie Viva Las Vegas. Most people see the stars in swimsuits, but take a closer look. In the background, you can see the white stripe on the shore of Lake Mead in 1964.
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Stars that made the hit parade.
In 1973, CBS's All in the Family topped the Nielsen ratings and shocked audiences. Elvis Presley continues to pack 'em in during his ongoing engagement at the Las Vegas Hilton. And a future Las Vegas resident hits the top 20 Billboard charts with a catchy tune you just might recognize.
My name is Michael, I got a nickel. Actually, my name is Clint Holmes, and I want to wish KLAS happy 50th anniversary and many more.
For the first 15 years, KLAS-TV was owned by the Greenspuns, the family which helped put us on the air 50 years ago this week.
But back in 1968, during a debate over which old movies should be shown in the middle of the night, Channel 8 ended up being sold to one of the world's richest and quirkiest men. His name was Howard Hughes.
8 on your side. This is Jack. May I help you?
In a classic 50s ranch house just behind our studios, volunteers take calls from Channel 8 viewers with consumer problems.
8 on your side. This is Bob. May I help you?
Bob Goggin takes calls in the shadow of billionaire Howard Hughes, who built this house and lived in it in the early 1950s. The famed aviator and industrialist had a decades-long association with Las Vegas. But it was upon his return here in 1966 that he had his biggest impact. Hughes started buying up casinos, thereby forcing out the mob. That fall, Hughes moved into the Desert Inn. He was supposed to occupy the penthouse for only a few days and refused to leave when the owners told him to.
After having exhausted all means to stay there, they truly gave him 48 hours to leave. And he said, what shall I do? And I said, well, if you want a place to sleep, you better buy the place. And he said, do you think it's available? I said, Howard, everything is available at the right price. He said, start negotiations.
So Hughes bought the DI in 1967. The following year, he made another purchase, KLAS-TV. Hughes enjoyed watching old movies on television in the wee hours. But sometimes he would nod off. He bought the station so that the bits he missed could be replayed.
It was kind of a little theater all for him, but everybody in town was getting it, and I'm sure there were some very confused viewers out there, I will tell you.
A very rich recluse, Howard Hughes died in 1976. But his Summa Corporation continued to own the TV station until it was sold to its current owner, Landmark Communications, in 1978. From atomic testing in the 50s to the 1980 MGM fire to this year's Operation G-Sting, Channel 8 was there for it all.
Up next, our own George Knapp takes a look back at 50 years of bringing you the big stories.
One of the most influential wars in the last 50 years was the fight that was never fought, the Cold War. America's arsenal of nuclear weapons helped keep the superpowers from starting a war that would end civilization. Nevada's biggest contribution to that effort, the Nevada Test Site. The year Channel 8 first signed on in 1953, there were 11 nuclear blasts at the test site, including the first and last firing of something new, a nuclear cannon. Around 20 nuclear cannons were built. They are in museums now. The one fired at the test site shot a nuclear artillery shell 7 miles and created a blast equal to 15,000 tons of TNT. In 1983, Michael Jackson's Beat It topped the record charts. And minor league baseball arrives in southern Nevada with the Las Vegas Stars. In 2001, the team is renamed for the not-so-secret military base, Area 51.
Happy 50th birthday, Channel 8 from the Las Vegas 51s.
Was our town really better when the mob ran the casinos? You still hear that cliche from time to time.
KLAS-TV has chronicled the rise and fall of organized crime in our city like no other news organization. Along the way, we've been witness to atomic fireballs, explosive growth, gut-wrenching tragedies, and incredible personalities.
Las Vegas, it seems, has more big stories day in and day out than anywhere else. George Knapp of the I-Team looks back on some of the biggest.
Everyone kneel down in your foxholes, look down, and stay down.
News stories don't get much bigger than the atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons just outside of town. Through the 50s and early 60s, government scientists at the Nevada test site uncorked dozens of atomic fireballs. Tests became tourist attractions. Later, they went underground, but KLAS still reported every one of them. One blast that wasn't scheduled was the Pepcon explosion in the late 80s, which rattled the valley, laid waste to an industrial plant, and led to regulatory changes. On the Las Vegas Strip, the rules seemed to be what comes down must go up. Our town has seen several growth spurts during the past 2 decades, both on the Strip and in the surrounding community, the fastest growing urban area in America.
Well, the people are waiting to be instructed. The ones that are hanging out there, the windows are waiting. I don't know how many are in the halls.
November 1981, the MGM Grand, one of the largest hotels in the world, caught fire. More than 80 people perished. The lack of fire sprinklers hurt the town's image. The MGM tragedy was quickly followed by another deadly hotel blaze, this time at the Las Vegas Hilton. This fire was arson. The town responded with the toughest fire safety standards in the nation.
I'm really confused about the organized crime part.
Without question, Las Vegas owes a debt of gratitude to those early investors, the mobsters and former mobsters who went straight in the Nevada desert and built fabulous properties, often with the generous help of the Teamsters Pension Fund. Of course, some of those characters didn't go straight. They retained their mafia ties and skimmed millions from the casinos. And on the streets, fearsome racketeers used muscle to protect the skim for their Midwestern mob bosses. Not until the mid-70s did state and federal regulators start fighting back. KLAS reporters chronicled every ebb and flow of the mob wars. Reporter Ned Day was a scourge of the local mafioso. He and news director Bob Stoddall produced the definitive account of that tumultuous time, Mob on the Run. Ned Day died less than a year after the murder of Las Vegas top mob figure Tough Tony Spilatro, but Day is still remembered fondly some 16 years later. As the mob moved out, the corporations moved in. Billionaire Howard Hughes led the way, buying up hotels like Monopoly pieces. Visionary Jay Sarno created the first themed resorts, Caesars and Circus. Later, another dreamer named Steve Wynn kicked off the ultimate casino explosion, a new generation of mega resorts. Growth has meant the friendly, chummy Las Vegas is gone forever. In its place are streets clogged with traffic, polluted air, and resources stretched to the breaking point. Success has attracted trouble, violent labor strife on occasion, drugs, guns, and gangs. Crime in our city has made national headlines many times. The jail siege of 1979, the murder case of the century, who killed Ted Binion. KLAS has often scored the exclusive interviews.
The china that they had taken out of the cabinet, and I'll show you where it was.
And for all that's known about our corner of the desert, there are still some mysteries. Remember when no one outside of Nevada had heard of Area 51, the super-secret base where the military's most classified projects were tested? That changed in 1989 with a series of sensational allegations first broadcast here.
Actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
Our focus on Area 51 eventually led to the creation of the nation's only extraterrestrial highway. Then, as now, all paths seem to lead to Las Vegas. Brighter, gaudier, occasionally troubled, but always ambitious. And for 50 years, only one TV station has covered it all. George Knapp, Channel 8 Eyewitness News.
We've come a long way from the days when casinos were called clubs, when the Strip was still known as the Los Angeles Highway, and when a new home costs $17,000.
Those were the days. What can we expect in the future? We'll take a look when we come back.
Around 1980, the face of gambling in Las Vegas changed forever, but at the time, no one saw it coming. Pulling a handle was the way to play slots, until a company called Fortune Coin came along with a new slot machine. It was called Video Poker. The inventor thought they might sell 500 or 600 machines. Today, there are 90,000 video poker machines in Nevada. And Fortune Coin? You know it today as International Gaming Technology, IGT. In 1993, on the Strip, Treasure Island opens its doors. And at the same time, a piece of Las Vegas history goes out with a bang, with the implosion of the Dunes Hotel.
Hi, I'm Wayne Newton, and I'd just like to say happy 50th birthday to Channel 8, and boy, another 50, and when I get your age, I hope I look as good.
One of the reasons Las Vegas thrives is because it's always reinventing itself. It's hard to find words to describe the changes in our valley over the last 50 years.
We've gone from a tumbleweed train stop to the tourism capital of the world. Dave Crevassier joins us with a look at just how life has changed over the past half-century.
Gary, Paula, the last half-century is surely worth remembering. But what's ahead for us? That may be hard to say, but not impossible. Let's look to the next 50 years now with some help from residents who remember what life was like here the past 50.
Las Vegas is a place where much of the past makes way for the future. And maybe that's why people visit Las Vegas again and again. Back in 1953, when the skyline still included the Sands and the Desert Inn, Dale and Helen Nelson honeymooned in Las Vegas. In fact, they've spent most of the last 50 years here and have seen the changes firsthand.
It happens rather gradually, so you don't notice that, it's not like it happened overnight, like a mushroom popping up or something. But just that gradual growth, and then suddenly you wake up one day and there it is. Houses all the way up to the mountains.
Houses to the mountains, resorts to the sky. In 1953, Las Vegas was a small western town. About 50,000 people lived here. Back then, there were only 17 schools, 14,000 students. Today, about 250,000 kids go to class in 277 schools. The Clark County School District predicts there will be more than 400,000 students by the year 2013. More than a dozen of those schools are in Summerlin alone, the community masterminded by the Howard Hughes Corporation. Hughes President Dan Van Epp thinks the school system can handle what's ahead.
In terms of absorbing another 200,000 or so students over the next few years, that's probably going to mean splitting up our district. It's probably going to mean doing some things different administratively. But all in all, yeah, I think we can handle growth in our school district.
In 1953, McCarran Airport had just a few flights a day, and everything had a propeller. Now, millions mob McCarran every year, and the city has grown up around it. Future plans call for a new airport to be built in Ivanpah between Jean and State Line. Look for new growth to take off that direction, too.
Southwest is the natural direction along the Interstate 15 corridor. It's the link to California. I think the airport being located out there will certainly help that corridor develop.
It's hard to imagine what the next 20 years might bring. But looking back to the past 20, Van Epp says there's one person who made Las Vegas what it is today.
Well, that's probably Steve Wynn. Steve's creativity, introduced in the late 80s and early 90s, turned Las Vegas into a different place. We became not only a mecca of gambling, but a mecca of entertainment.
Today, about 1.5 million people call Clark County home. But experts predict that number will likely become 2 million in 2005, when Las Vegas turns 100 years old. And I think the telephone book kind of says it all. Combined, there are 2,804 pages in this year's residential directory and the yellow pages. But take a look at this. Back in 1953, the phone book was about the size of a TV guide with just 183 pages.
In the words of Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changin', and all I can say is thank goodness.
Up next, the Channel 8 blast from the past you won't want to miss.
While Channel 8 celebrates our 50th birthday, another everyday part of our lives turns 40. The zip code first started in 1963. ZIP stands for Zoning Improvement Plan. In 1963, Las Vegas had one zip code, 89101. Now, the Postal Service in Las Vegas delivers over 1 million letters and packages every day to 54 zip codes across southern Nevada. In 2003, Her dad was king, but today, Elvis's princess keeps him rocking as Lisa Marie Presley follows in her daddy's footsteps. America's favorite TV show is CSI, and a new look is in store for the north end of the Strip with the opening of Wynn Las Vegas, coming in 2005.
Blue Man Group is just one of the great acts that have changed the face of entertainment on the Strip.
Speaking of changes, over the years we've gone through quite a transformation ourselves.
Whether you've lived here a long time or just moved to Southern Nevada, we think you'll get a kick out of this next trip down memory lane.
Rock is our guest on Eyewitness News Saturday morning.
Maybe some of us haven't changed so much over the last few years. Sports director Dave McCann could still pass as a college intern. Long before the beard, George Knapp was just a baby-faced reporter when he came to Channel 8 in 1981. More than 20 years later, he's still breaking the state's biggest stories.
Well, that sign is still here.
We welcomed home an old friend this year after 5 years in Missouri, minus the mustache.
Kind of chilly out there, and what's the scene like out there right now?
One of Polly's first assignments was to brave the cold and ring in 1995 on the Strip, the beginning of an annual New Year's Eve tradition on Channel 8. For 30 years, newsman Bob Stoddall has been a driving force in local news. Today, he's our boss as news director and as vice president of news for our entire company. Get them before 10:30. Kevin is here with the weatherman Kevin Janison and I worked together on weekends in Madison, Wisconsin back in 1985. The clothes and the hair have changed a little since then. And speaking of change,
is out. There's still a lot of smoke in the hotel.
The voice sure sounds familiar. But who is that in these pictures?
Okay, maybe we've all changed just a little bit. And while Southern Nevada looks a lot different than it did back in 1953, our commitment to this community has never changed.
With every day that passes, we will continue to bring you what matters most in your life.
We look forward to being a part of your family and the many tomorrows yet to come.
We are everything we are today because of you, Southern Nevada.
So thank you very much for the gift of the first 50 years. Here's to the next 50.